It began with a whisper, low and slithering, crawling through the old walls of his grandfather's farmhouse. Nathaniel Clay, a middle-aged carpenter from Arkansas, had never believed in ghost stories or backwoods superstition, but the night he stumbled upon a weathered journal in the attic, everything shifted. The journal belonged to his grandfather, Thomas Clay, a man Nathaniel had barely known, save for the worn-out stories passed down through family murmurs. Stories about the market land and a buried treasure cursed by those who put it there. Nathaniel was supposed to renovate the house for sale, not go chasing tales, but something about the journal, its cracked leather cover, the brittle pages marked with shaky, ink-blotted handwriting, gripped him. There were sketches too, symbols, a hand-drawn map, a warning etched in large capital letters, "Do not dig." That night, Nathaniel didn't sleep. He stared at the journal under the pale yellow bulb above the kitchen table, heart pounding at each creak from the attic above. The next morning, Nathaniel drove into town to visit the local records office. He didn't know what he was searching for exactly, but a woman named Martha at the front desk directed him to a file from 1947. A property dispute. The Clay land was once part of a larger stretch owned by a miner named Elijah Burke. The man had vanished without a trace. Whispers at the time had blamed it on the curse of the native soil, but the papers never said what was buried or why people were afraid of it. Nathaniel returned to the farmhouse that afternoon, the journal heavier in his mind than in his hands. He wandered into the woods behind the house where the map seemed to lead. As he paced deeper into the thicket, he found something strange. An old iron ring bolted into the ground, barely visible under layers of moss. Around it, small carvings on rocks, circles with vertical slashes like closed eyes. The air felt dense, harder to breathe. A headache crept in. He marked the spot and left. That night, Nathaniel dreamt of a pit, a deep, yawning wound in the earth filled with whispers. Faces without eyes stared up at him, mouths moving but silent. When he woke, he was drenched in sweat, fingernails dirty as if he'd clawed something in his sleep. The journal lay open on his chest, to a page he hadn't turned to. More warnings. The eyes beneath do not sleep. Disturb them and be taken. Despite everything, curiosity burned stronger than fear. He bought digging tools from the hardware store the next morning. Told himself he just wanted to know what his grandfather was hiding. Just a look, a glimpse. He didn't even tell his wife back in Little Rock why he was staying longer than planned. Some truths, he figured, you had to face alone. By dusk, he was back in the woods. The digging was harder than expected. The soil was thick with roots, stubborn and damp, as if trying to hold back whatever lay beneath. After 2 hours, the shovel struck something hollow. Wood. A box, maybe. Nathaniel dropped to his knees, hands shaking as he cleared the dirt. It was an old chest, blackened by time. No lock, no hinges, just sealed shut by a kind of tar or resin. His heart raced as he pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, wrapped in rotting cloth, was a collection of small objects, gold coins, a medallion with those same eye-like carvings, a ring, and a bone, human-looking, bound in twine. The moment he lifted the cloth, a gust of cold air burst upward from the hole, so strong it blew out the flashlight. The forest went dark, not nighttime dark, empty dark, like something had swallowed the light. Nathaniel stumbled back, heart thundering in his chest. He could hear something moving, not around him, beneath him. Whispers again, only this time They had tone, rhythm, almost words. He ran, flashlight flickering as it came back to life. Trees seemed closer than before, pressing in. When he burst into the clearing near the farmhouse, he dropped to the ground, panting. Something followed him back, he could feel it. Inside the house, shadows moved where they shouldn't. He kept the lights on, the journal locked in the drawer. But that night, a voice spoke clearly in his ear as he dozed off. "You took what was bound. Now you are too." He jolted upright, the temperature in the room icy. His reflection in the dark window wasn't his own. The eyes were gone, just black holes watching him. He tried to leave the next morning, packed his truck and drove until the GPS glitched. Every turn led him back to the farmhouse. It was like the land had folded around him. Trapped. The radio played static, interrupted by distant, guttural chants. Nathaniel screamed in frustration, slamming his fists into the steering wheel. He felt watched, his skin crawling even under sunlight. He buried the chest back in its place that afternoon, covering it carefully, whispering apologies. But the woods didn't accept them. That night, something clawed at the windows. Something tall, lean, silent. He fired his rifle twice into the dark, but silence fell again, heavier than before. The next morning, claw marks were on the inside of the windows. Desperation drove him to contact a local historian, Harold Price, who specialized in folklore. Price arrived 2 days later, skeptical but curious. He listened, read the journal, and went pale. "This symbol," he said, pointing to the medallion's eye, "it's from an old Appalachian cult. They believed in Earth Watchers, spirits buried with treasure to protect it. No one was supposed to remove the bones, not even touch them." Nathaniel broke down. "What do I do?" he asked. Price hesitated. "There's a ritual to seal it again, but it needs a sacrifice. Something alive. Blood for silence." Nathaniel refused. But that night, the thing returned. This time, it left a message, scratched into the wooden floor. "Return it with your own." Nathaniel was losing time. Hours vanished from his day. He'd find himself in the woods without memory of walking there. The house felt smaller each day, colder. Price tried the ritual with a goat, chanting over the chest. Blood spilled in a circle. For a moment, the air cleared, but the calm didn't last. The goat's body was gone by morning. So was Price. Only his coat remained, neatly folded on the porch. Nathaniel knew what it meant. He left one last message for his wife, telling her not to return. Then he went back into the woods at night, carrying the chest. He didn't speak, didn't breathe a word. He simply lay beside the pit, chest on his chest, waiting for the voices. They came. The farmhouse has remained empty since. Locals say the woods behind it are cursed. No birds sing there. GPS still scrambles. One man claimed he saw a figure with hollow eyes standing near the tree line, just watching. They say at night, if you listen close enough, you can hear scratching, like nails against wood, and a single whispered word, "bound." Nathaniel's truck remains parked behind the house. No one's had the courage to tow it, and sometimes the front porch light flickers on, just once, as if someone still walks inside. It started with a map, a crumpled, yellowing piece of parchment tucked between the pages of an old book at a second-hand bookstore in Lincolnshire. Daniel Hawthorne, a 48-year-old history teacher and amateur relic hunter, found it purely by accident. At first glance, it looked like a child's drawing. Wavy lines, crude symbols, and something that resembled a skull near the bottom right corner. But the date written in faint ink, 1732, gave him pause. Daniel's heart pounded with a mixture of skepticism and fascination. Could it be real? He didn't tell anyone at first. Not his colleagues, not his sister who lived nearby, and definitely not his ex-wife, who already thought his obsession with buried junk was borderline lunacy. But the idea gnawed at him for days. The map hinted at a burial site just beyond the abandoned village of Blackmere, an area rumoured to be cursed and left untouched since the early 1800s. The deeper he looked into the history, the more unnerving details surfaced. Disappearances, strange symbols carved into trees, entire families vanishing without a trace. Yet Daniel's curiosity only deepened. One foggy Saturday morning, Daniel packed his gear, a metal detector, digging tools, water, and a flashlight, and drove towards Blackmere. The closer he got, the more isolated the surroundings became. Fields gave way to dense woods. Birds went silent. Even the air felt heavier. When he parked his car at the edge of the forest path, he noticed something odd. No insects buzzed, and not a single leaf rustled despite the breeze. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath. He followed the path the map described, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. For nearly an hour, he wandered, checking landmarks on the parchment, until he reached a gnarled oak tree marked with a single deep gash, just like on the map. Excitement surged through him. He unpacked his tools, marked the spot, and began to dig. The earth was surprisingly soft, almost too easy to work through. After about 30 minutes, his shovel struck something solid, hollow, wooden, a box. He knelt down, brushing away the soil with trembling fingers. It was a chest, bound in rusted iron, with strange carvings along its edges, some resembling runes, others disturbingly close to faces. Without thinking, he pried it open. The hinges screamed. Inside were gold coins, a few jeweled rings, and an object wrapped in black cloth. Daniel reached for it, unwrapping the fabric slowly. It revealed a small, human-shaped idol made of some dark, almost pulsating material. The eyes were gouged, the mouth twisted in agony. As soon as he touched it, a freezing shiver ran down his spine. Daniel's instincts told him to drop it, to bury the entire thing back and walk away. But greed had its grip. He packed the contents into his bag, glanced once more around the silent woods, and hiked back to his car. But the return journey felt different. Trees seemed closer, shadows longer. He stumbled more than once and heard what sounded like whispers in a language he didn't recognize. When he reached his car, the sun had dipped far lower than expected. The drive home was unusually long. The GPS rerouted him twice through unknown backroads, and once he swore he saw a figure standing in the trees as he passed, motionless, watching. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. The idol sat on his desk, wrapped once more, yet it seemed to emit a faint clicking sound, like teeth chattering in the cold. He told himself it was his imagination, stress from the day. But when he woke the next morning, the idol was on his bedside table. He hadn't moved it. Trying to rationalize, he blamed sleepwalking, but it happened again the next night, and the next. Soon, Daniel began hearing faint breathing near him. Even when he was alone, the lights in his home flickered more often. One morning, he woke to find every mirror in his house shattered and the black cloth gone. He tried to contact a local historian who specialized in occult artifacts. The man, Dr. Reginald Muir, agreed to a meeting after seeing the idol through a photo. When Daniel arrived at his office, Muir's expression changed immediately. "You need to return this," he whispered. "This isn't just cursed, it's bound. A guardian spirit was sealed with it. Whoever disturbs it awakens the curse." Daniel laughed nervously, brushing it off. But Muir wasn't joking. He handed Daniel a page of ancient scripture and a location marked in red ink. "Return before the new moon, or it won't sleep again." Determined to undo his mistake, Daniel drove back to Blackmere 2 nights before the new moon. But the forest was darker now, as if the trees had thickened. He walked for what felt like hours. His flashlight kept dying, and he had to rely on memory more than the map. When he finally reached the gnarled oak, he could hear chanting, low, guttural, and far too close. He dropped to his knees and began digging frantically. The soil resisted this time, harder and packed. Finally, he found the hollow. He placed the idol back inside the chest, repeating the chant Muir had given him. But the voices didn't stop. In fact, they got louder. A gust of wind knocked him backward. The earth around the chest cracked. A pale hand shot out from the ground, clawing toward him. Daniel screamed, stumbling away, his heart pounding so hard he thought it would burst. The trees groaned, and from their shadows he saw faint outlines of twisted figures approaching. Dozens of them, their eyes glowing faintly. Daniel ran, leaving everything behind. He didn't stop until he saw the headlights of his car. As he drove off, the forest seemed to howl behind him, as if warning him never to return. Days passed, and Daniel avoided the woods entirely. But the curse wasn't done. Wherever he went, he saw reflections that weren't his. Faces in windows, eyes in puddles, shadows moving on their own. One morning, he found the black cloth neatly folded on his kitchen counter, though all his doors had been locked. Dr. Muir went missing a week later. His office was found ransacked, and the walls were covered in the same runes as the chest. Daniel tried to flee the country, thinking he could outrun whatever had followed him. But at the airport, the scanner refused to recognize his face. Unidentified, the machine kept repeating. Today, Daniel lives in isolation in a remote cottage in northern Scotland. No phones, no internet, no mirrors. He burns candles, recites prayers, and sleeps only during daylight. But sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, he hears scratching at the door, and every so often, he finds muddy footprints by his window, small, barefoot, and pointing inward. He knows he's not alone. That thing, whatever it is, never really went back to sleep. And Daniel, he's just waiting for the knock he won't be able to ignore. The first time Ethan Harper heard about the treasure hidden beneath Black Hollow, he laughed. It was during a late-night poker game in a crumbling village tavern just south of Dorset. The man telling the tale was an old drunk named Lennox, whose breath smelled of wood smoke and whiskey. But the way his voice dropped when he spoke of the hollow, the way his eyes darted as if something might be listening, stuck with Ethan long after he left the table. "They buried it under the ash tree," Lennox had whispered, "sealed it with blood, cursed it so no greedy hand would ever leave the ground whole." Ethan wasn't superstitious, but he was desperate. His contracting business had gone under, his wife had left, and the bank was weeks away from seizing his house. So when he found himself parked near Black Hollow the following week, spade in hand, a map in pocket, he told himself, It was just a harmless adventure. Something to distract him from the mess his life had become. The hollow was a sunken patch of forest, dense with twisted trees and damp air. As he walked in, the breeze stilled and the sound of birds faded. There was something wrong about the place, something that made his skin crawl, but he pressed on, the memory of Lennox's words etched into his thought. It took Ethan hours to find the ash tree. It stood taller than the rest, with bark scorched black and roots that coiled like serpents. At its base, the earth was unusually soft. He knelt, began to dig. The shovel bit into the soil with ease, and a scent like rot and rust rose into the air. He tried to ignore it. As he dug deeper, his hands began to tremble, not from exertion, but from the creeping sense that something was stirring below, something aware. At a depth of about 4 feet, the shovel struck wood, a box, rough, decayed, and bound in corroded iron bands. Ethan pried the box free and set it on the grass. It looked ancient, far older than any pirate chest or wartime crate. With a rock, he smashed the rusted latch and lifted the lid. Inside were bones, small ones, finger bones, arranged neatly, all pointing inward to a scrap of parchment. The writing on it was in a language Ethan couldn't recognize. Sharp, angular, and seething with something that looked like rage. He reached for the parchment, and the moment his fingers touched it, a scream erupted from the trees. Not a human scream, something hollow, deep. The air thickened and Ethan stumbled back, nearly retching. That night, back at his rented cottage, Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept hearing whispers behind the walls, words he couldn't understand. The lights flickered. Shadows seemed to move just outside his vision. And when he glanced at the mirror above the sink, he saw someone else's eyes looking back, eyes that shimmered red in the dark. By morning, the parchment was gone. The box lay on his kitchen floor, splintered and empty. In its place was dirt, black, wet, and reeking of decay. Ethan burned the remains in a panic, but the smell clung to the walls like mold. Ethan returned to Black Hollow, determined to bury the box deeper, to undo whatever he had unleashed. But the forest wasn't the same. The path had twisted. Trees leaned in as if watching, and there were no animal sounds, no wind, only the low, pulsing hum that seemed to echo from the ground itself. As he reached the ash tree, he saw something crouched by the hole he had dug, pale and long-limbed, its head tilted unnaturally, sniffing the earth. It turned when it sensed him, eyes gleaming like coals. Ethan froze. The thing smiled. He ran, tripped, fell, crawled back to his car with shredded palms and a scream trapped in his throat. He didn't look back, not until he reached the cottage and locked every door, every window. He tried to convince himself it was just a trick of the mind. Stress, sleep deprivation. But when he woke that night with soil in his bed and handprints on the walls, he knew better. The whispers had returned, louder now, more insistent, calling his name, beckoning him. Ethan became obsessed. He stopped eating, stopped speaking to anyone. He covered the windows, painted the walls black, and wrote symbols, ones he didn't understand, all over his home. They came to evict him a week later, found him curled in the bathtub, eyes bloodshot, whispering in a language no one could identify. The house was abandoned. No one wanted to buy it. Locals say it groans at night, that sometimes a voice hums from the basement, one that sounds like it's still digging. Lennox, the drunk, was found dead in his shack 6 months later. They say his body was bone dry. His tongue was missing, and on his walls were scrawled those same angular symbols. The village priest refused to enter. Burn the place to the ground. Black Hollow remains untouched. Hikers get lost. Compasses spin wildly. Phones stop working. And if you listen closely, some say you can still hear Ethan digging, still trying to put something back. Whatever was buried wasn't meant to be found. And once disturbed, it doesn't rest. It waits. It watches. It finds ways to follow. Through mirrors, through cracks in the wall, through whispers in the trees. And those who hear the whispers never truly stop digging.